Welcome back. In this session, we shall have a quick look at handling of the documents and handling of discrepancies. The very important paragraph given in the introduction to ICC publication number 411 when in 1984 when two UCPs were compared by Webels is that UCP is not and cannot be intended to give precise answer to each and every problem arising in the practice of documentary credits. UCP is not and cannot be intended to give precise answer to each and every problem arising in the day-to-day practice of documentary credits. So the trade finance practitioners are expected to put their own intelligence on a case-to-case basis and based on their experience to find solution for occasionally essentially individual problems. A one-off cases, if there are here and there, it has to be solved based on their experience and situation. But the general guidance will be given by UCP, which means the drafting of the contract, the drafting of the LC application, the drafting of the letter of credit. It is at these 3 points that the parties and the banks are concerned should apply their intelligence to ensure that the presentation will not be discrepant, that the LC is workable, LC is operative, and beneficiary will be able to present complying documents and to ensure that LC remains a payment mechanism and not a stopper of payments. So having said this, the intention of the examiner is not to identify discrepancies, but to ensure the document, but to check whether the documents are in compliance with the requirements of the credit, whether they are in conformance with the requirements of UCP and SPP. Now, what's the process of handling the documents? Article 14B of UCP gives us the guidance that the bank has 5 days to handle the documents. What is it? Within 5 days or a maximum of 5 banking days following the day of presentation. The bank has a maximum of 5 banking days following the day of presentation to examine and determine whether or not they appear on their face complying. So, they have 5 banking days. The 5 banking days is maximum, and this 5 banking days is available only for the bank. So the bank has a maximum of 5 banking days, and that is calculated from the day following the day of presentation. So day of presentation is day 0, and what is it for? These days are for to examine and to determine. You have to examine and to determine whether it is complying or not. Determine complying, you have to pay. Determine non-complying, you have to refuse. How you will determine? By examination. Examination of what? Examination of the document presented, whether or not they appear on their face to be compliant. So it is based on docs presented alone and not on any other else, and it is for the banks, and it has to be done within 5 days, and it has to be done whether they appear on their face, not a forensic check, and you will not check any other information available outside the documents presented. If the documents comply, they have to take up the documents and arrange for settlement. If the documents do not comply, the bank will have to decide whether to refuse or to seek a waiver. So this decision has to be taken. This is a very important decision. If you agree to settle, it's very simple. You can settle it. But if you agree that it is not complying, and if you agree it is discrepant, then as a bank, one has to decide whether to refuse or whether to seek a waiver. In many cases, the applicant may have given approval of such discrepancies to the beneficiary. The beneficiary would have approached the applicant for an approval, and the applicant would have said, "Oh, this is not a problem. This is a minor discrepancy. We will accept you. Send the documents. We will waive it. There's no problem. We will take up the presentation." Now, the banks will seek a waiver by approaching the applicant, and the banks doing that is confined to consultation. That is, the issuing bank is not bound to ask, and if they ask, is not bound to by the guidance given by the applicant. This is very important thing that the beneficiary will have to remember while believing that the applicant had waived the discrepancies and it is okay to present discrepant documents. How rejection will be handled? In case the banks decide to reject, then there should be a notice provided by the party examining the documents to the presenter. The notice should be in accordance with 16C and D of UCP. What it should say, it should indicate that they are refusing to honor or negotiate. The rejection notice or the refusal notice should explicitly indicate that they are refusing to honor or negotiate. It should be by expeditious means, telecommunication or whatever. In many places, even by phone, it should be acceptable. It should be no closer than the close of the 5th banking day. That is, within 5 days after the receipt of documents, it should happen. And must state all or each and every discrepancy. Must state each and every discrepancy which is causing refusal of the document, and it should say the bank is doing what with the documents. So bank is doing with the documents could be four options. One of them is holding the documents pending further instruction. Other is holding the document until it agrees to accept a waiver from the applicant. Then this is returning of the documents, and fourth is acting as per previously received instructions. If it says it's returning the document in the next possible point in time, they can return the document. If it is saying that they are holding the documents pending instruction or holding the document until it receives a waiver, then also the bank can return the documents to the presenter. Normally, the refusal is sent by means of Swift message type 734 because it has structured fields, and they can return the documents thereafter if they have said that they are waiting for further instruction or they are waiting for applicant's instruction. Now, waiver. Article 16b of UCP talks about discrepancy documents, and it gives an issuing bank the option in its sole judgment to approach the applicant. It is an option, it is not compulsory, and the option is decided their own discretion. Nobody can compel them. People can request them, but it is not compelling, compulsory or obligatory on the part of the issuing bank to approach the applicant, irrespective of the fact that whether somebody requested or not. And their approaching applicant is only for the purpose of consultation, and this approaching will be for waiver of discrepancies. It will say we have received a discrepant presentation and we have been asked to approach you as to understand whether you would like to waive these discrepancies and take up the documents and pay up for the presentation. So the applicant should be willing to waive the discrepancy, take up such a presentation and pay for the discrepant documents presented. Now this should be within the 5 banking days. Irrespective of the fact that whether you have approached the applicant or not, irrespective of the fact that whether applicant has responded to the issuing bank or not, issuing bank will have to, or the nominated bank will have to come back and tell the presenter that the documents are discrepant within 5 days after the receipt of the documents. And the banks are not bound by the applicant's decision to waive or not to waive. If the applicant says waive, the bank can choose not to waive. If the applicant says do not waive, the bank can choose waive. But the risk is, if the applicant is given the list of discrepancies and the applicant says do not accept, and if the issuing bank chooses to accept, then the applicant may say, because these are discrepancies, we will not be reimbursing you. Because the fine print in the LC application says this LC application is subject to UCP, and you are asked to issue a letter of credit to honor against a compliant presentation subject to UCP on these lines, on the information given in the LC application. So if the presentation is considered discrepant at a particular point in time and thereafter issuing bank chooses to accept, the applicant may dispute and reimbursement from the applicant could become a small problem. So the issuing bank could waive despite not having received a waiver from the applicant. And this decision does not amend the documentary credit. Any decision by the issuing bank to take up a discrepant document, a non-complying document, does not amend the credit. And it does not bind the issuing bank to honor subsequent drawings of similar discrepancy under the same or a different credit. So taking up a discrepant document does not amend the credit, and taking up a discrepant document does not make it obligatory to take up future discrepant documents, whether it is the same discrepancy or similar discrepancy. If the issuing bank agrees to accept the applicant's waiver of discrepancies, then they will take up the documents. They are not duty bound to, but they can. Now, when applicant agrees for discrepancy and the issuing bank takes up, it does not affect in any way the liability of the issuing bank. The issuing bank's liability to honor on due date remains as it is. If the issuing bank rejects the applicant's waiver, then they have to give notice of rejection to the presenter, the nominated bank, the confirming bank, or whoever it is, and that should happen within the 5 days. If the nominated bank finds discrepancies in the presented documents and asks the issuing bank for authority to honor or negotiate, then it is called may we negotiate message. When such a message is issued, the issuing bank has to promptly take up with the applicant, and the applicant has to promptly respond, and the response could be you may negotiate provided otherwise in order, subject to the listed discrepancies. And then the nominated bank will negotiate such a document or honor such a document and present the documents to the issuing bank. The presentation schedule should say that these documents were negotiated subject to your approval to our may be negotiated message dated this, or your response dated this. So the applicant's mandate is to debit the account only for confirming documents. This has to be kept in mind by the banks when they decide upon the discrepancies and they take calls on minor discrepancy or acceptable discrepancy or other things, interpretations. The issuing bank may refer to such a maybe negotiate mechanism applicant's approval, and applicant may respond. Meanwhile, the beneficiary would have contacted the applicant to enter into some agreement. Suppose there was no maybe negotiate message. Suppose there was a discrepant message present to the issuing bank, and then issuing bank decides, okay, these are discrepants, we are going to refuse. The market practice is though it is a choice available to the issuing bank to refer to the issuing applicant. Why? Because the beneficiary would have anyway approached the applicant, and applicant would be anyway aware and ready to take up the goods by taking up the documents, by waiving the discrepancies and agreeing to pay. So the market practice, and as a matter of customer service, most of the banks, most of the time, will refer these discrepancies to the applicant unless there is a suspicion of fraud or suspicion of violation of sanctions and boycott regulations and things like that. So there is a very short time between the notice of refusal and then further taking up of the documents. Now, during this short time, there could be so many correspondences. One of them could be the presenter will dispute the discrepancy advice and quote certain USBP, ISBP clauses to say the documents should be considered as discrepant. The examiner should have enough capability to respond to such claims to say why it was decided as a discrepancy, and should be able to quote the guidance given in UCP and ISBP to safeguard his decision. Now, there have been so many cases where situations where banks or the parties have approached ICC for their opinions on certain discrepancies, and ICC has given decisions. These decisions of ICC on the whether the document or a situation is a discrepant or not is called opinions. Now, these opinions can be a guiding spirit for the banks, but it cannot be quoted to say that because of this opinion, it has been considered discrepant. What will be quoted is at best an ISBP, but normally the particular paragraph of the UCP should be used to decide whether the article, the document presented has been discrepant or not. And the discrepancy advice should state which document, which term or phrase is not complying with which article of the UCP or which paragraph of the letter of credit. The presenter must be kept advised at regular intervals about the documents, the status of acceptance, the status of waiver and things like that, and the document should be securely stored because these documents belong to the presenter unless and until it is paid. And these being bill of ladings will be title documents, and insurance is also title document, and if something goes wrong, these documents originals will be required to be used for recovering the money that could be lost. Thanks for watching this video. We shall meet again in another session on other aspects. There are detailed videos on settlement, reimbursement processes, as well as the products related to the documentary credits, risk associated with the documentary credits for the various parties, and money laundering. This had been a very crash and fast course, and the speed of the discussion had been to keep in line with this being a refresher for CDCS preparation.